Welcome to the Building Blocks podcast, where we discuss the career paths of leaders in the energy, utility, and construction fields to better understand the habits, routines, and mindset that has built these successful men and women. I'm your host, Brad Coleman. It took me 20 years to understand my strengths. My goal is to identify the common traits of leaders in our industry to provide you with the tools you need to be successful in a fraction of that time. Thank you for listening. For more information on these guests and others, please come find me on LinkedIn. Thank you for listening. For more information on these guests and others, please come find me on LinkedIn. But I've been in that point where little kids at home, you're trying to manage and juggle all these different relationships. And, keep up with your own personal health. How do you do that? How are you expected to be able to do that? And you get so used to you're the caretaker of the family, so I've got to make sure, particularly our wives, when they're working moms, they have careers of their own, trying to juggle them in that relationship, making sure that they're feeling okay about it all, where we tend to put ourselves on the back burner. But that's where,
I don't really know if it's a perfect way to do it, but if I could give advice to people that aren't married and don't have kids yet, it'd be focus on your career until you are. Get to a place that you're happy with, because when you have kids and you're going to go through that newborn stage till they're in school, you're probably not going to be chasing promotions. You're going to just be going through emotions, doing what you're comfortable with, doing your job, and that's a season you go through. And you're going to have to figure out what things you like to do for fun that you're going to keep doing, your hobbies. So I used to do flying planes, I used to scuba, I used to do a lot of fishing and hunting. I can't do all of them. I don't have time. I pretty much only fish now. But that's because we have 2 ponds and I can go out front. But if you want to, and I used to rock climb, go to dinner with my friends, watch a lot of football, things like that. I just can't do it anymore. You have to pick the ones that are most important to you. And until your kids are, again, at that age where they can play by themselves, go to school, maybe even they move out of the house, you're going to have that 4 or 5 year, maybe 7 to 8, 10 years where you don't really chase those promotions anymore.
there is a time. I love that you use the word seasons, because that's exactly the word that I use. Because sometimes when we're in that valley, honestly, it feels like it is never ending. Especially when your kids are little and you think, I got 18 years of this, 18 years from the youngest one. It's not really like that. That's because as they age, you start to see the growth in them. They become a little more independent and their stages of life change. So how old is your oldest son? Your son?
He's 18 months.
18 months. Okay. Once they get to 3, 4 particularly, you can really start to see a shift in their stages of growth and how much time requirement from a nurturing standpoint that takes.
Right.
So then you start to realize, okay, the 18 months, you can probably already tell the seasons change for them very quickly. I said my favorite time, I think, was that 18 to 24 month when they could walk and very exploratory, trying to figure out how to talk. And everything is just like, they have the ability, they've got that curiosity. They see something over there and they're going to go over there because they want to go see what it is.
Yeah.
But the seasons of life I think that's the right way to look at it. If I were to write a book on advice to young professionals, and one of them was, and I don't have it listed in front of me, but one of them was compounding efforts with everything. We talk about compound interest with our finances and retirement and that sort of thing. But there's something to be said for our attention and focus and how it compounds as well. And from that time of early 20s to, let's just say 30, maybe before you have kids or up until the point you have kids, if you can really double down on your focus and finding yourself and where you want to spend your effort in your career, the first step is even learning what your interests are and how that piggybacks with your strengths. The next thing is figuring out how to apply that. And it's like you said, if you can go deep on that for a couple of years before kids, there comes that season where you do have little kids at home, particularly you and I, who both have wives that have their own careers. And we always knew from the time we first started talking about kids. My wife's a physical therapist at a county hospital, and she said, I love my kids. I want to go part-time. I cannot be a stay-at-home mom. It's just not in my DNA. I mean, she had her own career, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, I need something to do to get out of the house. It wouldn't be healthy for them. It wouldn't be healthy for me. We had the ability to cut back on her hours there for a couple years where she went part-time. And with our oldest, it was like she was working 3 to 4 days a week and maybe like 3/4 days. I mean, it's nice to be able to have that flexibility of schedule.
Yeah.
And then after about a year, she kind of started gradually moving a little bit closer back into full-time. Mm-hmm. But now you got a shift in my schedule because I'm taking him to daycare, picking him up from daycare. And it just adjusts schedules and stuff because daycare hours are weird. So it's nice to be able to have a little bit of flexibility in your schedule. And that's kind of where my boys are 14 and 11. Mm-hmm. Now we're way past that stage, but honestly, I feel myself being pulled more, not retirement necessarily, but I might not want to work full-time till I'm 62, 65, 67. What would happen when they get in high school in the next couple of years if I decided, hey, I have to pull back and be able to adjust my schedule a little more? That's where we kind of have to be a little more intentional with our careers early on to kind of picture what that path might look like. How could you take the skills that you had and do consulting or do, I don't know, maybe just part-time, maybe kind of a for-hire gig, some of the stuff that you do, right? I mean, you being kind of a fractional executive from that standpoint. And I'm kind of getting out of order because that's almost leading me right into the questions and stuff, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to get ahead of myself.
I have a guy I can forward to you. I just took his class and Lance recommended it. It was only $100, but it really helps you clear your message up, clear your niche, who you want to talk to, and it helps you kind of make your story up actually, because I might try to reference it. But it breaks it down into like 8 steps. Like, what was your problem? Mine was, I didn't want to be in construction. That resonates with people. I'm teaching people how to be in construction. I didn't want to do it. But it walks through like, this was the problem. It's like a movie, right? This was the problem. This is some of the things that happened. This is the peak of what happened. This is how it all got resolved.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, send it to me. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So what we're doing here is really good for like 30-second LinkedIn clips. It's not going to play well for a continuous podcast episode. I'm going to test, Renee, once you're watching this editing, I'm really going to test the bounds of your experience here.
I mean, if you want to like do a podcast like break, like you can almost make 2 recordings if you want. Stop it and then re-record.
Yeah. So I've actually got your LinkedIn profile pulled up, and when we get started here in a second, I kind of want to lead into that a little bit, and then I'll kind of introduce you and let you take it from there, and then we'll just kind of roll with it, if that's cool.
I'm just reading through this so I can remember without reading it.
Oh, yeah. No worries. I'll try to prompt you well enough.
No, it's all good.
You ready? Yeah. Okay, we're right at about the 10-minute. See, I don't really even have an intro ready to go. I might just have to record it.
You could always do that separate and then have it.
Yeah, some people have that as a separate intro where it just leads directly into the conversation itself. So welcome to the Building Blocks podcast. Still haven't even looked at the name. That's funny. Welcome to the Building Blocks podcast, where we interview professionals in the construction and utility industries, leaders in our space, to dissect and pull out segments of how they got where they are, maybe what they would recommend others do. Young professionals just getting into the industry, what to do, what not to do, lessons learned. Today we're here talking to Josh Luebker, and Josh owns his own business. He's the owner of Sulphur Prairie Management and has a pretty extensive background in construction, project management, several different fields from that perspective. Josh, will you just talk a little bit about, I know you actually hold a couple of positions right now with your own segment of Sulphur Prairie, but I'll just give us a little background kind of on your journey that led you to where you are today and some of the different roles that you fill today.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Brad. It's really nice to be here. So my construction journey has been very unique. I started out fighting wildfires. I didn't actually want to do construction because in high school, I did some during the summers and it was miserable. I didn't like the field people I worked with. I didn't like the owners I worked with, and I did not want to be any part of it. When I ended up transitioning, I went through a divorce and I got out of firefighting and opportunity to work at a data center as an assistant project manager, more or less. Kind of built my way up, learned the technical stuff, and I felt like I was kind of capped there, whether I would only be at a data center. And it wasn't really that fun. It felt like a prison. There's not many windows. Started looking around at other places in the country, moved to Florida, and that really what started to spark my life. I found out there's so many people that don't know as much about the technical side about the trades. They just kind of more or less like an accounting firm that does construction. People that were project managers didn't know that. So that was a niche I had, kind of leaned into that. Met my wife in Charleston, so I moved to South Carolina from Florida. I did runways, CIA buildings, Langley Air Force Base. I mean, I got to do some really cool projects there. Dulles International was one of the biggest ones. Yeah, we had to tear out an entire runway in 90 days and then get it back operational. Every day it was something ridiculous, like $10,000 a day liquidated damages. And some of the contracts were like $500 a minute. It was nuts. So, yeah. And I ended up moving to Nashville with my wife. She went from residency to fellowship. I did more of the higher education, Vanderbilt stuff, hospitals. So I've done a lot of everything. But then we had our son, and that really changed my trajectory. We couldn't find a good place for him to get into school or daycare. So it was pretty much, I stayed home. I left my job. I left the workforce. But one of the people I met along the way, who owns Wilco, really saw the value in what I know about construction finance. So I help him as a fractional CFO for him. I work through a lot of processes that help the project management team because I know that it's more of a COO. But I also helped him transition from QuickBooks into Sage and did a lot of that. But in the later parts of my career, I was really given the opportunity to train a lot of young PMs because I had seen the industry from so many different angles. I had seen subcontracted crews. I've seen electricians that were very technical and could do data centers. So I really could pour into the contract side, really technical stuff. And I got to do some really cool projects. And I leaned into that. And that's when I started my own business. Started just training people. I was coaching one-on-one. But then we found out we had our second one on the way. So I immediately pivoted and now I do the online training. That way it's easier. I can help more people and scale and just let them grow their career at their time. And that's really grown a lot. There's a lot of companies that reach out that now are using it as like onboarding. Every company are different. Some might do every single task and some might only manage people to do everything. But in my opinion, the best PMs know how to do everything and help coach other people in different sections of the company. If you know how to go talk to your contract manager, your BIM people, and you know what they do because you can do it yourself, you can show them and they really know that you value them. So that's really kind of what I lean into is teaching PMs how to be very effective.
Can you elaborate a little on, you said the technical side. You mentioned the technical side, and I assume you're differentiating between technical and something else. Like there's almost a dichotomy there. When you say the technical and when you say doing everything, and I agree. I find it fascinating that within our organization, the project managers are the one area that we're not expected to know everything, but you have to be able to speak the language of accounting and finance and all of the executives and reporting to everyone enough to be able to communicate the aspects of the project. So can you talk a little more about what you mean by the technical side and what you train on to make a more well-rounded project manager?
Yeah. So the first technical thing I learned was the field. I was in electrical. So I had to learn all of the technicalities behind what goes into install everything. I actually have my master electrical license.
The trade itself.
So to learn your trade is important, yes. But then beyond that, the technicalities, how to read a contract, what different verbiage kind of means, what you kind of want to red flag. I won't ever give legal advice, but what I try to do is train with like volume of experience. For me, the first contract I read, I was like, I don't know if this is normal. Get paid in 90 days. Sure, we'll sign this. And the owners are like, no, we want to negotiate these things. And after I've seen 150, 200 contracts now, it's like, okay, I know it's normal. I know what we can negotiate for. And if somebody tries to throw the everybody signs this contract, like, well, that's not my company. And we're not going to put ourselves in that position. So everybody else can do that, but that's not my problem.
And this is the fractional side of your business now. This is not your individual project management
So this
training.
is actually what I teach as my online stuff.
Okay, so your online stuff, you're consulting with the construction companies, not the one-on-one coaching like you initially started?
Correct. So I used to just do one-on-one. I would meet like this, like you and me, just talk and walk through a contract. But now what I do in my course is I actually recorded myself with Zoom and I go through everything so you can pause it, bookmark things, and go back through different sections. But actually companies have been reaching out to me because they're the ones that want to have better training. I have a lot of individuals taking it. They take the initiative and there's a lot of benefits to that. I work with people as like I'm a reference for their technical ability, their aptitude, endorse them on LinkedIn, things like that to help them. And they have my personal information if they ever want to use me, if they get a new job or something. But with the business side, if they want to train their whole department to be on the same level, like if you get a PM that's been in industrial, that's so different than multifamily. Does that make sense? And if you go from a $500 million company to a $30 million company, the responsibilities are so different. So what I try to do is level the playing field so you know everything, and then let the companies pick the processes and how they want their PMs to manage. But at least the PM knows what is required and why it's required. Not just, I have to get the COI and the W-9, but I don't really know why. So maybe we can just skip this part and I'll have him come on site anyway.
That's actually a very interesting example when you talk about the W-9, because when we have a new vendor online, my accounting people would say, hey, I need you to reach out for their COI, their W-9. I'm like, what is that? What the heck is that?
Right.
And I've gotten not in trouble. People have been frustrated with me early in my career. I always needed to understand why. Maybe it's not a good quality. Maybe it's makes me stubborn headed, but maybe it's buy-in. But until I could understand why we're doing something, it'll be easier for me. Maybe I'm seeing it from a different perspective, or I need to be able to explain it to somebody without just repeating what the accounts payable people told me to ask for. I'm a big fan of change management, process management, that sort of thing. And so maybe there's something in the way that we do things with the flow of invoices that if I understood why we do things the way we do, maybe the project management side of it could make some adjustments and we can make your life easier. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that W-9, that was really, that cut me whenever you said that, because that was when I had no idea, why are we doing that? What do you need it for? Why not? I'm busy trying to get the project off the ground and you're asking me for these little details that I don't have time for. And so it sounds like that's a lot of what you,
It's the exact same thing for me. I didn't know.
Is that kind of what you're doing? You would be the guy that, in terms like Brad, broad umbrella, you'd be coaching me inside that organization to say, look at the big picture here. This is why they need this to be able to do their job better. Yeah. This is why we need you to do this. And because in helping me understand that, you're making me a better project manager, because it kind of just raises my awareness of the touch points of everything on my project.
Right. So my whole thing is like from blueprints to boardrooms. So I take people that were BIM people, field people, college graduates, anybody, and I give you the knowledge of how business runs. So you can be a great project manager and you can be like an executive. Executives need to know why you need a W-9 so you can explain it. But what I ran into in my career is you have a young PE, APM, myself, and I'd ask my AP people, why do you need the W-9 COI? Well, they're also young and out of college and they don't know. They're just like, this is a requirement in my system. So nobody knows. But when I went to the federal level, It's like, okay, the COI makes it so if anybody gets hurt, the insurance requirements, they're covered and we're not liable for anybody else not doing something. And the W-9 makes sure, especially since it's federal, they're a legal business. We're not just paying somebody their social security number and we're not taking out taxes and we're going to hit with payroll taxes later. So those are very important to know why. Now, instead of me saying to another PM at another company, hey, I need this from you, and they're like, hey, yeah, we're working on it, but do you want us to start tomorrow? It's like, I can push back now and say, no, I have to have these. Make this a priority right now. And it gives me that leverage and confidence that I know what I'm asking for.
Okay. I was going to say, you're talking to 30-year-old Josh, but you're barely 30 now. You're talking to younger, straight out of college people. I know how when we get overwhelmed and when we get busy, I think if we don't understand the full process, you tend to drop processes that in the back of your mind seem less important.
Right.
Chasing down a W-9 is a perfect example. For one thing, because whoever my contact is in that organization probably also doesn't know what a W-9 is or where to go within their organization to get it. And it's like when I'm training another project manager, what I had to start telling them was you have to think about who in our organization is asking and then find their counterpart in the other organization. So you have to think a little more holistically in terms of if they operate the same way we do, they're going to have similar levels and structures. And if nothing else, pick up the phone and just call. I had to do that just 2 weeks ago. We were having trouble getting an answer from a permitting department at a railroad. And I was like, I'm just going to take a shot, pick up the phone and call the main number on their website, and got a nice lady at the front desk. And it took me a minute. I had to explain who we are, what we're doing. We're just trying to pay you. We owe you money. We're just trying to pay you. Who would be the person that I need to talk to for this?
Right.
And she said, I'm going to forward you to so-and-so. And mostly because she didn't know, but she was kind of taking a shot in the dark. Right. And so I left a long voicemail of what I needed with that person, also with my return contact information in case they're busy. I'm trying to make it easier for them. I never got a call back. Had 2 different people within the organization send me the W-9 within the next week.
Yeah.
Like that got sent somehow internally to whoever it needed to be.
Right.
When I get busy, you tend to focus on what's my tasks that move my project forward. And the things like chasing down that is stuff that gets left by the wayside. Talk a little bit about why is it important to understand kind of the totality of the job and be able to still understand why they need that in terms of managing your project and the value that it brings to the other people within the organization by you helping them.
Yeah. So if you think about every time an email is sent, how much time is wasted and how much stress you get, and then people get a little more condescending every email back and forth when it's not figuring out a problem, when it's like, I just need the W-9, and like people just keep getting more frustrated. What I try to teach is in 3 different steps, right? From beginner to intermediate to advanced, is make the process that every time you write a purchase order for a subcontractor, ask for this. And then it doesn't matter why, just make sure that's part of your process. And that'll help with burnout, because as you move into the intermediate side, now you can push back, you can learn why, but you don't have your AP department coming after you. They might go after every other PM in the organization who doesn't know. But imagine how less stressful you are and how you get recognized so quickly. The executives will be like, well, this person never has any problem with it. Go ask them how they do it. Now you're the go-to person for something simple like a process on collecting a W-9 immediately. And then set a calendar in your calendar reminder a year from now or whenever it expires to make sure you collect it 2 months ahead of time or a month ahead of time. That way you start to get it. Instead of waiting on the day it's due, that's so much undue stress for no reason. And that's part of the reason I want to help people get away from it.
One of the things that I really like is, I call it breaking down departmental silos, working across organizations. That's one thing I read that I would love to aspire to be a COO one day of a small construction company where that's what you do is manage and create workflows and streamline and that sort of thing. But it's so important to be able to not get so tunnel vision focused on our job and our department that we think about how our actions influence the other departments. And what kind of, you've probably experienced this personally because you're the one that's alleviating that pressure valve in creating these types of processes, and you're building it into their workflows of the expectation. What happens with the relationship with that project manager and that accounting, that AP person, whenever they're proactively asking for things like a W-9 in advance? Just from a personal standpoint, just how they converse and stuff.
Yeah, it becomes super nice when you don't have somebody come into your office, knock on your door, and give you crappy looks of like, why haven't you gotten this? It's been a week and a half, right? But deeper into it, after 6 months to a year, they begin to really trust you. And one of the things I really focus on in the advanced construction management I'm working on right now is the speed of trust. You can be 280% more profitable and more efficient by having trust. And that AP person now knows, this PM knows what's going on. I'm going to bend over backwards to do something for them. So think of the benefit of, I did something stupid small, stupid easy. Just ask for this up front. They don't have to bother me. It takes one less thing off their workload, and they can check a box because people in AP tend to be very type A. And if you can help them like click things in their brain, it makes them like you so much more. It's incredible. But now when you go to them and you're like, hey, I really need to get this paid immediately. I know I missed the box. I missed the deadline. Can you help me out? They'll bend over backwards for you. But if you were the guy who was like waiting on a week and a half and you have W-9s you don't have, but you have people on site, they're getting their butt chewed from their bosses. You can just see the complications that it keeps creating versus you could be that guy that's just, or that lady that's just smooth sailing.
They may have KPIs on how long it's taking for invoices to get paid.
Yeah.
Or how long it's sitting in their queue, right? I mean, anymore, when we have such advanced systems to be able to manage invoices and POs and that sort of thing, it's real easy to get metrics on, hey, that's been sitting in your inbox to do for 2 weeks. Why is that? Well, I can't get so-and-so to get the paperwork so I can set them up as a vendor. And that just creates unnecessary stress for everyone.
Yeah. And a lot of stereotypes. A lot of people don't like project managers. In companies, project managers are like from the field side, like they're lazy. They just go play golf all the time. They're too busy to take my call. And from the office standpoint, they're like, they're always going to lunch. They're always going to the job site. They're never around when I need them. They don't know what's going on.
While we're doing work, they get to go to the job. They get to go out to the field and check out that job because it's a pretty day today.
Right. So when you can break that stereotype and they're like, oh, this person actually knows what's going on. I like working with this person. You can get so much more accomplished. And that's what gets you elevated.
Yeah. I'm a big believer, and this is a stereotype itself. I'm a big believer that certain personality types gravitate towards certain job roles.
Yeah.
And the example that I always use is when I was a freshman, I always enjoyed architecture. And so I decided I was going to go to architecture school. And my second year, I enrolled in an architecture school at the University of Texas, Arlington. Great architecture school where you had 2 freshman level classes. One of them was architecture history, which I absolutely love. You get into studying Frank Lloyd Wright and a lot of the famous architects and stuff. I mean, just really cool. You start to see the nuances of architecture in the real world. But the second one it was beginner level art, freehand drawing. And half of that class were freshmen that were on art scholarships. And I am not artistic. That's when I realized, I used to think architecture and engineering kind of had a similar pattern. And that was when I realized they are complete opposite ends of the spectrum. That engineers are the analytical brain and the architects have a little more of that creativity brain. I didn't know. And I still didn't go into engineering, but I went to drafting school, and that's what led me into the project management work. Because I'm a little more aligned with that analytical brain. And accountants, again, I'm going to play with the stereotype. I mean, they're very analytical brains. So when project managers can be checkbox people, but I like to say, really, we're spinning plates. And you have to be able to keep all the plates spinning and figure out what needs the most immediate attention. And that can be difficult sometimes for an analytical brain like an accountant or somebody that lives in that world to be able to not be stressed out a lot of times.
Yeah. Well, and they have like a set every week. It's the same thing, right? Payroll on Monday, process invoices on Tuesday, Wednesday. It's easy. Easy.
And it would kind of drive me crazy. I like it when the fires pop up, right? It's just that every project is a different situation. You don't want there to be problems, but you understand that it's a different task.
Right. I'm like so different on that too, because I hated fires. So at the end of my career, I'm like, there's not a fire today, I'm going to be super happy. Because I'm more of like the spinning plates, I'm more of like okay, I'm now 5 months ahead. What's the next problem that's going to come up if I need to focus on what's next, right? Okay, the gear is going to be coming, so I need to make sure I get a tugger lined up and this and that. And I make sure I get my place in line and I get everything organized. My favorite thing was when I went to a hospital and we had to reroute the power around it. So we had to go on their emergency power and whatever else while we put in manholes and pulled the wire for their secondary, like a redundant loop. And to watch how everything organized perfectly, like the crane got there, 30 minutes later, the manhole got there, an hour later, both were set. 20 minutes later, they were pulling wire. Like, to me, that's a good project manager. That's the best, the pinnacle of plan coming together.
At that point, you've moved beyond, you're right, because you can't live in the world of fighting fires all day and that be sustainable because that creates stress. And it wasn't until, things pop up and I was fine managing the day to day and I didn't understand the value of what you're saying. But I hired another project manager for my territory, our area here in North Texas, to where whenever we also around a year later hired someone to handle permits and easements and all of the land and right of way related tasks, to where I was, for the first time, was able to say, he's got that handled. He's got that handled. Okay, what else do I need to be looking at? And that's where it's like, wow, I can breathe a little bit. What obstacles are for our project? My job now is to look further out to see, it's exactly what you're saying, planning those things actually in advance, like project management should do in advance of the problems instead of in real time.
Right.
And so now it becomes, okay, well, what problems are they potentially going to face that because of my experience level, I can look a couple steps ahead of them and maybe work to diffuse some of the problems before it gets to them. And that's where it comes to more experienced project manager leading experience. Fortunately, that experience that you have from 10, 15 years of being a project manager and doing some of the same types of projects, you can look at it and say, okay, we're doing permits for this. Well, did you check to make sure, is there another pipeline crossing that we need to get an easement for along the route? Is there, what municipalities are we going through that we might have to permit along the way?
Right.
Are there water lines that we're going to have to cross? Things that need to be looked at before you actually get out in the field and you get a call from your inspector saying, hey, there's a water line here that we didn't know anything about.
Well, and that's fine. Fires, they happen. But if you can avoid 90% of them, everybody loves working with you. They'll name request you to be their PM. One of the biggest hills that I've been recently dying on lately on LinkedIn is I think IQ is more important than EQ as a PM. Because if you have the IQ to look ahead and fix those problems and address them before they happen, you have no need for EQ. I had, out of all the projects I've worked on, I had maybe 10% of them that didn't go great because there was it was speed. It was the time I got it and I didn't have enough time to plan and fix it, or another trade did something, or general contractor overdid something. And there's some things that are unavoidable. And that's where EQ comes into play. But with 90%, I would say, of construction, you can avoid it if you just work on the technical skills of doing what's required, when it's required, in the right order. You don't have to have much EQ to do it.
Yeah, you're kind of,
It's a hot take.
That's what, well, I mean, it probably shouldn't be. It's just, it's counter to what a lot of the discussions are right now. And seems like a valid pushback. And I get what you're saying. So are you then, from that perspective, when it comes to managing projects, do you default to more of a checklist? Like, do you build workflows for people to try to head off any concerns like that in advance? Or what are the methods that you've found to be able to organize yourself and help people organize their teams to be able to say, have we considered all of these technical aspects that need to be considered to think about those problems? Is that what you're saying? Correct me if
you can make them a checklist. When I first started in project management, when I moved to Florida, that's the first thing I asked is like, is there a checklist of what you guys require for processes? And they're like, no, clearly not. It's not industry standard. But what I do try to focus on teaching, the way I go through it is, here's how you navigate specs. Here's where you find what's required for submittals. Here's how you build a procurement log from that. Now here is where it's going to take a little technical experience, and I won't get into that in the online training. That's more of like a niche, and you have to know your technical side and ask people around your industry. What's the longest lead? What is going to be a showstopper on this? Like, the first thing I do is make a device receptacle submittal. That's the last thing that goes in. I can get that approved instantly because nobody cares about it. But gear and generators, those are 54-week lead times, and they have to be right. So now you have that submittal. Let's make sure we do it right, and we do it now, and we don't have a resubmittal come in unless there's a design change. Right? We want to make sure it's right. I get in the weeds. That's my thing. Here's the generator submittal. Here's the spec section. It says you are required to have ASTM 52. Does this one say it's ASTM 52 approved? Is this UL listed for this? Is this copper? Is this aluminum busing? Into so you do it right.
When you started out by saying, I'm teaching them how to know how to find things. I mean, what I'm hearing is, because you ended that by being a little more technical in terms of the ASTM specs and making sure, but where I felt like you were going with that initially, correct me if I'm wrong, was, I mean, you're teaching them how to think through projects. I mean, how to think through
the logic,
processes and problems, right?
Yeah. It's a better way to put
it. How do we train the generation just coming out of college to be able to think dynamically like that, instead of, like, it would be great to be able to take the 10 to 15 years of work experience and screw ups that I've had to be able to package that and hand it over to early college graduates that are trying to figure out their own way without having to make a lot of the same mistakes. But how do we teach the lessons, and how do we teach people how to process and how to think when they've never really had to think spatially like that within a job before?
Yeah, so it comes a little more into a project manager, and this is what I try to teach in the intermediate and advanced, is how you train people. But the process I go through is, here's kind of the general overview. This is the life cycle. This is how it's supposed to happen. Now, things don't go that way. Something comes up and needs to be submitted immediately. You need to know what ball turns what, so you can make it happen today. And you need to know who's in charge, so you can call that person, follow up with paperwork, but you know how to get it done. And the way you train the younger generation is experience through more projects. So many people get out of college and are like, I want to be on that big project. The data center I was on was great, but it was 3 projects over 3 years. So I only did so many submittals. I only did so many closeouts. I didn't know what was standard. I didn't know who really did what because it was only one specific job. But when I got into airfield, I did 15 projects in 1 year, start to finish. And I really saw that life cycle from submittal to everything to closeout docs. That's what you need to give new people in the industry. Show them, like, here's why the submittal matters. Give them 15 projects really quick that they can see start to finish at different phases. Even it doesn't have to be start to finish. But if you put them on one project like GCs do for 3 years, and then you make them a PM, they have no idea what they're doing. They did submittals 3 years ago. That makes sense? You have to do repetition.
This book keeps resonating with me, and I just thought about it. It's been out a couple of years, but it's called Smart Cuts. Mm-hmm. I cannot remember. The author was like one of the founders of Wired magazine or something like that. And I hate that I'm drawing a blank on his name. He's coming from a tech background, right? So there's very much this agile software development kind of a mindset kind of ingrained into the book. And one of his lessons is shorten the feedback loop for quicker, more continuous improvement.
Yeah. That's smart. That's smart.
He uses the example of Second City, which is the improv group that's basically is kind of the feeder pattern into Saturday Night Live. So he said he went to Second City in Chicago to see how they operate. And what he found was it's not like you go through this big, long school or in your example, working on this one project forever. It's no, you learn, do, screw up, feedback immediately, go back and start over. And by doing that continuous cycle like that, the learning cycle is shortened, so it's easier to learn from your mistakes. And what it leads to is quicker improvement overall. Iterations, I guess, within the software and the project management world, the agile world, the term would be shorter, more frequent iterations of a project. And that's what you're saying, like project to project, right? When you're able to see start to finish on 1, 2, 3, it's like multiple projects. You're kind of see it a little more holistically.
Yeah, you need to understand the whole scope and not just have done it once. Like that whole saying, it's not my first rodeo. Well, 2 rodeos isn't a lot of rodeos, right?
Yeah, there's a lot. I think it's hard to replace experience, frankly. And we talk about how we very often we learn from our mistakes as much as we learn from our successes. Yeah. Talk a little bit about, you told us like the actual steps in moving in your career and how you ended up here. Were there particular inflection points between the different stages? Or I want people to watch this and be able to recognize one of the things that I want to tell people is you have more direct control over your career path than we think. To anyone, I'm 43, I'll be 44 next week. I'm right on that pivot line of the Gen X and above. Historically, it was you get in early, you pay your dues. Sometimes that means like a hazing type of a mentality. You pay your dues, you work your way up. And we're seeing a real culture shift right now with the younger generation and the pushback, particularly because the younger generation is saying, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to just pay my dues because that's just the way it works. For one thing, when you did that, there was a pension, which doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
But also, and so I think what has to come out of that is the younger generation understand you have a more direct control over the career path and the way you build your lifestyle. Exactly what we were talking about before, where when we have younger kids, I want to be able to dial it back. I want to do something that allows a little more flexibility. Talk a little bit about maybe you weren't as intentional with some of the moves, but what would you tell your younger self about how you ended up where you are, how intentional to be, how to plan out those sorts of things to at least trying to figure it out along the way, if that makes sense?
Yeah, there's 2 things I would tell myself. One, I was always chasing a title, and it wasn't really money. It was more like I wanted to run my own project because I didn't have a good leader. One, I learned from not perfect people. I learned some really great things from people, but then I also learned 60% of their habits were bad. That made me a worse project manager if I did. I didn't really have somebody sit down and show me. I just am pretty intuitive with seeing that. So I don't think I made any bad moves by moving to the next one and chasing that, like, okay, I've capped out here and it's just time to grade. I'm just going to move on somewhere else and learn that. I don't think that was a problem. I can't remember the other part, but that's okay.
In moving to the fractional side of things and even into your coaching, it felt like that was kind of a flow that really you were growing into.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I like that you said at different organizations, you felt like you've kind of just capped out there because, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you were still very much in growth mode and you might have just felt that, hey, those around me necessarily aren't. it's not that they're bad, but I'm still looking for personal growth, development, and we find ourselves around people that are very content.
Right. Man, there's something inherent about me. I don't know. Maybe it's the instant gratification of all of the video games and stuff through our generation, but it's like, I've done this and I'm bored of it. I've mastered it. Like, okay, yeah. I'd go to a meeting and they're like, hey, we need to submit on this and get a permit for that and procure this subcontractor. And I'm doing the project manager's job in some of these because he's going through some stuff. And I'm like, hey, when am I going to have my chance to do it myself? Because I'm doing it anyway. Just like, give me the official title in my own project. And it's like, well, you just be patient. I hated that. Like, just dragging the carrot out in front of me. And you're not really giving me anything. I mean, I had to ask for a review. I had to ask for more responsibility. And obviously, every time I take it, I prove that if I don't know, I ask. And I never left anything on the table. Always made sure it got done. I'm relentless about it.
That's a second hot take from Josh. Video games make us better for a growth mindset.
Hey, like at 16, this is going to bring out the nerd in me, but I played a lot of computer games, and I could lead 40 grown people through all of these random events at 16. Like, that taught me more than going into the real world and trying to figure it out.
I think there are transferable skills there to be learned, really. I mean, especially now in the world with the connectivity of some of the online forums and that sort of thing.
Right. That was the younger nerd in Josh.
Yeah. Back pre-kids, pre-career, when you had more time for that sort of thing. Let me see. Is there any one particular skill that you feel has contributed to your success that you would recommend others develop for themselves?
And the one thing that just keeps coming to mind is just the tenacity. Like, I didn't realize this as a assistant project manager because I'm not managing other people. I'm just comparing myself to what other people are given for opportunities, right? And then I see them drop the ball. But as a project manager, and I've managed 20 different people, I know who I can count on. Tenacity of, I'm going to give you a task and I'm going to show you how I want it done. I'm going to give you flexibility. I'm like, if you want to adjust it, make it better, that's great. But I want to show you the purpose so you understand what I need. And then to attack it. Like you said earlier, if you have to call some random number, like that's something that's, I'd say 70% or 80% of assistant project managers will be like, oh yeah, I'll do that. And they just won't call anybody, or they'll call and they'll get the voicemail and they'll say, well, I left a message. And when you check in with it 5 days later, and it's like, okay, well, did you follow up? Did you call them during lunch? Did you try? And the tenacity of, I'm going to make sure that I get this permit because it's needed. I am going to make sure that I get this RFI answered. I'm going to make sure that our material is actually coming on time. And if I have to go pick it up myself, I will. Like, that tenacity is what makes the difference between what people will call a process manager or a paper manager versus a actual construction project manager.
Any common traits that you've noticed in those that maybe are more the process manager type, that it is just a checkbox to make the call and leave the voicemail? I'm not going to blame everything on younger generation. Is it lack of experience, to not understand the need to take ownership of the task, or any commonalities that you've noticed there? Is it somebody that typically just doesn't work out in that position because they refuse to take ownership, or is it more of a learned trait that has to be demonstrated to them?
Man, that's a good question. I would say the first thing I do when that happens is I look at myself. Did I give them the right information? Did I give them the right timeline? And did I give them also like the knowledge of how important this is? Did I make this a fire? And if I did all of those things, then that's kind of where they have it talking. And it's like, look, if you're not able to have the tenacity, I needed this done. I needed to count on you. And this is how you're going to grow your career. If you don't want to be here, then, you might want to look for other opportunities. And it's really harsh, but it's like kind of that kick in the butt. And you see a transition with people when that happens. It's like, I'm honest with people to a fault where people they don't like it. And it's like, look, I can do this easier without you. I could have made that call. I could have taken 15 minutes and made sure it got done. But now it's 5 days later, and you told me you had it handled, but you didn't try. You barely tried. Like, you did the main thing I've been getting into now is like working hard and working late hours and doing all these things doesn't mean you're standing out. The way you stand out is somebody gives you something, and at the end of the day, you're like, hey, I'm wiping these off your whiteboard because I handled them. What can I do now? Be a team player.
The first thing that you said there was what you do in that, though. It's the Jocko extreme ownership attitude of the first thing you said is not go to them and figure out what they did wrong or why they didn't follow up. You said, what's my responsibility as the leader in making sure that they understood the assignment? No, it's not, why didn't you get that done? What you said, you turned it inward and you said, okay, did I communicate the job, the task to them well enough of what they needed to do? Did I communicate the urgency of it and the importance of it? Right. And that's one of the traits of good leaders is it's not, what do we have to do to get this generation to do what they're supposed to do or work harder? It's what's my responsibility in bringing this generation along to understanding not just the task in front of them, but how it fits into the bigger picture and why it's important to getting it done on a deadline or in a timely manner.
I would say that's one of the things I try to focus on in the advanced project management is how you train a replacement, how you now teach everybody what you know how to do, and you're retrospective or introspective of those kind of things. You have to be honest with people too. At the end of the day, I see so many people on LinkedIn and Facebook. They're like, I'm looking for an entry-level job. Does anybody know any internships? That's not trying. Everybody does that. Everybody's trying to get a job. But who's calling executives? Who's going to job fairs? Who's showing up with a paper copy and saying, hey, I'm interested in working here? Not just, do you have a spot? I'm looking for any leads. I want to work here. What do I have to do to work here?
I was talking to somebody the other day, and he's graduating from a trades program soon. And we were talking about, he was asking for kind of advice and stuff and how difficult the job market was. And he's willing to move anywhere in the country to settle for a job. And I said, well, you can't really be applying all over the country. But I told him, I said, I went through what my personal process would have been is pick a couple areas of the country that, for one, well, maybe fit your values, have good job markets for what you're doing. You don't want to move somewhere and then you can't find a job long-term, but also affordability and live the lifestyle you want to live. He was in California and he was willing to move anywhere. I said, well, I'll tell you right now, because I've done this research, the lowest tax burdens are in Tennessee, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. I was like, if you agree with the values in those areas, and we know that at least Tennessee, particularly that Nashville area and anywhere in Texas right now are hot button job markets, start finding out what your values are and just start narrowing it down. And like, okay, what companies do what I do in those areas where I'd like to live? Start following those companies on LinkedIn, find the hiring managers. You can't just go connect with them in an immediate ask, but connect with them, be gracious and thanks, and start looking through their website, learning what they do. And I mean, there's a process to it, right? And
don't do it with 1,000 companies, do it 10.
Exactly. Because you'll overwhelm yourself. And that was kind of my rationale in going through all that series of steps, is to narrow the 1,000 down to 10. Because realistically, you should be able, if you find where you want to live and you're willing to live anywhere, you should be able to start to narrow it down. But I had just never thought about the fact that he's probably never been told that. I take that for granted because I geek out on things like, one day when I retire, between sales tax, property taxes, income taxes, what's the lowest tax burden state? Most people aren't dorky enough to think about that sort of thing.
Right.
But
I do the same thing.
It's like you and I say, I love being up in Arkansas, up in the mountains in Arkansas, but I can't go there now because there's not a population of areas. Well, my kids are in school and I'm not going to take them out, but it's not the job market that there is in Dallas Fort Worth and the contacts that I have here and stuff. But recreational to visit, I love going there. Might even consider retiring there one day because it's kind of more of the lifestyle I want to live when I move into retirement. But it's a little slower than I would want on a daily basis, except for the metro area.
And to that point, one thing I really took for granted on my career journey was I'm good at making contacts. Like, I've moved and I lost all of my contacts for subcontractors that I trusted, all of my vendors, everything. Every time I moved, yeah, you have to do it within 3 months or less. You have to know, who am I going to trust? I'm going to give this person a chance. You have to have a methodical way to do that. And it makes me proud that even in Arkansas, I don't even work. And I have people in town that are asking me my advice on businesses.
So, are you actively networking around town?
No. Like, I go to a lunch event with my wife for her work, and they're like, oh, you do this? Let me hear more about that. And they just like, maybe it is networking, but it's not intentional. I'm not trying to.
You're not going to local networking events and trying to find other people to network with. It's just what comes out of the conversation.
And I've had some work done on our house. All these contractors here are like, oh man, we're struggling in the winter months. And I'm like, well, and then they have feast or famine. Too much work in the summer and nothing during the winter. And I'm like, well, here's how you make yourself future-proof through the winter. Charge a little bit more during the summer because you know how good of work you do. And you don't need to accept every job. Just accept more money, less work, and then you'll have that extra buffer of 20% for the winter to ride through if you need to, or you build that reputation of work quality. And somebody will want you regardless.
Another thing I guess I take for granted, do you find that small business owners on trades and contractors like that just don't think about that sort? Are they worried about the day-to-day?
Even the company I CFO for, the guy who owns it is brilliant. He is very good at doing the work. He was blue collar. He grew up in the field. And then he's figured a lot of it out. But even when we have discussions, he's like, man, I never thought of it from that perspective. I take it for granted because I've done construction for 9 years in massive companies. And all I've done is negotiate. And to me, it's not negotiating. It's like, this is fair. This is not 90-day payment terms. This isn't negotiation. This is, if you want us to do the work because you like us as a contractor, treat us like it, pay us within 30 days. And if you won't do that, we have clients that will.
So, yeah. And that's the key, right? I would imagine that's a large key is they have to have the confidence in their pipeline of work to know that they do have clients that will.
Well, even I would go a step further, even having like that fake it till you make it, like have that false confidence. Like, I don't want to do work for cost because that's just spinning my wheels. And I could have made a job the last 3 months that made me money instead of just taking this to keep busy. Keeping busy doesn't pay the bills.
One thing you talk about was the owner that just kind of grew up in it, but he's now the owner. I don't think you and I have talked about this, but I'm sure you're familiar with, do you know the E-Men? It's a lot of what he talks about. And he takes the entrepreneur and he says, Michael Gerber, I think is the name and of the author. And the book's probably 20 years old now, but the concept is the same. He uses the example of a lady that makes cupcakes in a bakery. Mm-hmm. And she says, I love making cupcakes. I want to do this on my own. I want to start my own business. And she loves making cakes and cupcakes. She goes out and starts her own business. But what she finds is she has very little time to actually make cupcakes because she is the accountant and the marketer and the janitor that has to sweep the floors and do the staffing and all of this. Mm-hmm. And they get a
place to do business.
Handle all of the business aspects when really it wasn't, she didn't want to own a business. She just wanted the freedom to be able to practice her trade without somebody necessarily looking over her shoulder.
Right. She wanted to make money making cupcakes, but didn't know.
She wanted to do more making cupcakes without thinking about she needed a boss.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And so
100%, you're right.
The purpose of the book is, and I think it would really benefit. I mean, you have your system, so I don't mean to disrespect you there, but I think that you would appreciate the perspective of He then takes it and says, okay, I think the other example is two brothers that own some sort of a company. Let's say it's a construction company, right? They know what all they do and they have to hire a third person. Well, she doesn't really know what her job title is, what her responsibilities are. This brother thinks she's doing that. This brother thinks she's doing something different. And there's all this back and forth. And she ends up getting so stressed out that she quits because of the disorganization. And he says, what you need to do is you have to create a employee chart, flow chart, an org chart. And he says, you're going to map out all of if this is fully grown, fully developed business, you're going to write a full org chart, assuming every position that you would need. Now, it just so happens there's only two of you. So your names are going to be on here 10 times and your names is going to be on here 12 times because you wear multiple hats. He's like, that's where the term wearing multiple hats comes from. Your name's going to be on all of them. But what happens is you're going to be doing everything, but you have the job titles and even go so far as to write a job description for every one of these, because that then now becomes, actually, you can reverse engineer it by say, take everything that you do now and that your brother does now, write all that out, and you'll see that splits out into pretty definitive job roles that you're each doing when you wear multiple hats. It becomes easy to hire because you can say, okay, what's not my strength or what do we need that I can't focus on? Okay, we need an accounting person. Okay, bam, we've already got a job title and role created for it. I'm taking it off my plate and I'm giving it to her. And she knows exactly what she's going to do. You've got it already planned out. And all you have to do is start divvying up those job titles as you continue to grow. And it allows you to get away from the parts of the business that aren't your strengths and you're just doing them because you have to. And you should start narrowing in on more your zone of genius and where you actually want to be working on the business, especially if that means CEO, when you need to be more of that visionary and training everyone to bring them up in their different roles. It's a really good book, the way he kind of breaks down the simplicity of it.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that one out. The one that really taught me a lot was the EOS, the concept of that. It's the same general principle about the organization chart, and it just really helps. The thing that resonates with me is right people, right seats.
Okay. There are
doing it.
The EOS, I've read Rocket Fuel, which explains the visionary and the integrator and the difference in the CO and CEO. That's when I realized that my skill set matched really well with a CO in terms of process management. And I even have traction, which is another one. But man, people that are in that EOS system, they are all in. And it's pretty amazing to see. I've never seen it fully functioning in an organization, but it is like a plug and play. It's not that easy, but they will be like, no, you follow the steps and it works. And they will swear by us.
I worked for a top 200 ENR company that did it. And it's really easy to get the flow of information and everybody aligned going the same direction. So it's less work to do the same amount.
Well, cool. Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time. I don't want to keep you too long. First off, where can people connect with you? And you can close out with that. And also I'll give you the last word of regarding your career, what personal life ambitions, as you've got young kids and one on the way and you're kind of going through some life stages and changes like that. What parting words of wisdom would you leave?
People can find me on LinkedIn, Josh Luebker. I connect with pretty much anybody that wants to, even if they're the same realm. And the parting advice I would give that I just received myself is realize, like the whole season concept, realize where you are today may change where you even want to go. Just take it year by year, day by day, have a 10-year plan, but in a year, 5 years, be okay and gracious enough with yourself to change the direction if you need to. We're really leaning into, do I want to homeschool? And that seems like a big commitment for 18 years. But what my sister-in-law told me was, just try it a year. If you don't like it after a year, 2 years, 3 years, you get 4 kids, maybe then you don't do it. It's okay to pivot.
Test and the gamification of life, trying to figure out some of the best methods and what works for you. And I think a lot of it is how you want to live.
And it'll change.
True. Yeah.
Like getting married changed my whole perspective. I thought I knew everything until I met my wife.
Yeah, well, I mean, the homeschool thing kind of reminded me of, I used to say I wanted to be a vice president until in that particular organization where I was, when I was nowhere close from an experience perspective to being a VP, I realized the sacrifice that they had to make on behalf of sometimes their families and the time. And it's like, that's when I kind of had to learn to make a distinction of, you can get there, but what price do you have to pay?
Right.
And if you decide that it's okay and you're willing to pay it, okay, that's cool. But be able to at least consider that there are options and there is a price to pay. The homeschool thing is, okay, well, it'll be great for the family. It'll be great for, we know the values that our kids are being taught. And it would, and that perspective, you know what, there are sacrifices to be made. And if you decide that's worth it for your family, that's awesome. It all comes back to kind of that seasons of life and understanding that nothing is permanent, I think, in our decisions and where we are, because those seasons change a lot between relationships into marriage and kids and whatnot, and on into as we continue to develop our career. Well, thanks, Josh. I appreciate it, and great talking to you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Building Blocks podcast. If you found anything beneficial from today, I would appreciate you reaching out and letting me know on LinkedIn. I'm always looking for ways to add value to the listeners and interviewing leaders in our industry. If you found this helpful, I would appreciate if you leave us a review and reach out to me on LinkedIn and give me some feedback. In addition, if you know someone that would be good for an interview, please let me know and I'd be happy to connect with them. You can find myself and any of the other guests on LinkedIn, where we continue the conversations about leadership, careers, growth, and development.